It's our first virtual conversation series of the year. It's always kind of an exciting time to start things off with doing a little bit of a learning. I'm going to share my slide as we're doing that. Okay. You'll see my slides here.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Sure. Okay. There are like so many moving pieces when you're facilitating. And so I'm just like getting all my pieces in place the way that I like them. So a funny thing to have this kind of a preference, but I feel like over the course of a pandemic, this is what we've learned about ourselves, right? That we need to have slides sorted out just so, we need to have our screens sorted just the way that we like them. And so that's exactly what I'm doing here. But thank you, everyone. I appreciate all these warm welcomes, these introductions that you're sharing in the chat. My name is Abby Prince Atwood. I'm the Director of Campus Growth at Leadershape, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm really excited to start a Monday, to start a work week, to start a virtual conversation series, our first one of 2024, getting back into the groove of hosting these frequently for folks. We started these back in the first summer of the pandemic, if you can remember, the summer of 2020. It seems so long ago, but we started these just as a way to bring people together in a way that was creative and hopeful, and to provide ideas for leadership educators in a way that things were just so different in that time. And we have found that they have continued to be helpful in this time. So I think this is our 12th or 13th or 15th possibly week of hosting the virtual conversation series. Who can keep track of these things anymore? But nonetheless, we're glad to continue offering them, coming back in this week that ends January and starts February. So we have a lot going on here. We've already done some introductions. If you're just joining us, then please continue to introduce yourself in the chat feature there. And then we like to start our sessions off by offering a land acknowledgement. I like to think of this as a land and sea and sky acknowledgement as well, just like acknowledging the indigenous and tribal nations that came before us. It was their home before it was ours. And so in considering how they cultivated the earth, what flew above them in that space, what swam in the sea before them, before we entered into this space, and just acknowledging the painful history of genocide and forced removal of those First Nations as we came here. Here in Central Illinois, we are on the homelands of the Potawatomi and Kickapoo First People. And so I just want to offer a pause as you think about who came before you in the spaces that you're occupying today. If you are new to Leadershape, or perhaps new to joining us for these virtual conversation series, I thought I would share that at Leadershape, we're a not-for-profit organization with a mission to transform the world by increasing the number of people who lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. Our vision is that of a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. It is with that in mind that we offer these virtual conversation series, and asking people to join in our community and join in the sharing in that teacher-learner space. So with that, we have a lovely facilitator that's joining us today, Lauren Bosselait, who's joining us to do some great conversation. And Lauren, I'm going to stop sharing so that you can get your slides pulled up and start sharing as you jump us into our conversation and learning today.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. It is so good to see you and to be with you today. I am going to be chatting today about 5 ways to integrate the career readiness competencies into a professional development series for student leaders. I know that the question that many of you are being asked is how to incorporate the career readiness competencies into your work. And really what that is how can you assist your student leaders with their employability to make sure that they're career ready once they've left their position or the institution that you're at. So I'm going to start just with a little bit about me, and then I'm going to kind of give you the roadmap for what this is going to look like for the next 30 to 40 minutes that we're together. So, just a little bit about me. I have as I was writing this, I was like, I actually have close to 20 years of experience, but that kind of hurts my heart. So, we're going to say 15 plus years of experience in higher education. Currently, I serve as the Senior Associate Director for Corporate and Employer Relations at Elon University. Elon is a small private institution in the middle of North Carolina. We're about an hour from Raleigh, and I live outside of Greensboro, North Carolina. Previous to having my role in corporate and employer relations, I was the director of internships at Elon. So I've been at Elon for a little bit over 4 years now. Prior to that, I was the associate director for first year experience and learning communities at the University of Cincinnati. So a lot of what I am pulling on, and the reason why I put this on here for you all to be aware of my background is I am pulling both from my career experience at Elon and also my work with about 400 student leaders at the University of Cincinnati. I was in that role for close to 6 years. And it was a wonderful opportunity. I'm also a leadership facilitator for Catalyst in the Institute, and I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach. So it's a little bit about me and where I am coming from. At the end, I will leave my contact information so you'll be able to have that. And Abby will also share out this recording and these slides with you. So this is a little bit about where we are headed in this next little bit that we are going to be together. I'm going to talk about the NACE career readiness competencies, but briefly. I'm going to show you a few slides about what those are and what those look like. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about top skills that employers are looking for from college graduates or students who are applying for internship opportunities. And then I'm going to discuss the 5 strategies that I think at least one of them you can incorporate into your work, but I'm hoping that many of these you'll incorporate into your work. The other important piece about this is after every strategy, I will pause for questions and discussion so that you're not holding your questions and your thoughts about something until the very end. Because I know how frustrating that can be on a webinar. You're like, 20 minutes ago when you were talking about. So I want you to be able to ask and me to be able to answer things in real time. So again, after every strategy, I'll go ahead and pause to answer any questions that you all have. So you can feel free to put your questions in the chat box and or take yourself off mute and ask. Okay, so we're gonna kick this off by talking about what is career readiness and what are the competencies. So NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. It is the professional association that guides career development centers' work. So career readiness is a foundation from which to demonstrate requisite core competencies that broadly prepare the college educated for success in the workplace and lifelong career management. There are 8 competencies that are on this slide. For higher education, career readiness provides a framework for addressing career-related goals and outcomes of curricular and extracurricular activities, regardless of a student's field of study. So this is meant to cover all of the areas within the institution, and it doesn't necessarily drill down as major specific. For employers, career readiness plays an important role in sourcing talent, providing a means of identifying key skills and abilities across all job functions. And it offers the same similar framework for developing talent through internship and other experiential learning or experiential education opportunities. So the 8 competencies are career and self-development, communication, critical thinking, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. And so my hope is today, as I'm going through these strategies of how you might incorporate career readiness competencies into your work with student leaders, you'll be able to identify, and I'll point out some of the ways that this draws back to these competencies. This is all available publicly on the NACE website. So you can go to naceweb.org/career readiness competencies. These began in 2015. Sorry about that. 2015 is when this initiative began. And then in 2020, they were revisited and altered a little bit. And my assumption is that every 5 years, NACE will look at these competencies and talk with schools that are part of NACE and employers that are part of NACE. So over 300 members in the organization gave feedback about these. And like I said, they were altered just a little bit to make them a little more updated and give them some clearer direction moving forward. So I'm going to talk for the next 2 slides about what employers are looking for, and then I'll take a pause and answer any questions. So this is taken directly from an Indeed article that was published within the last 6 months or so about top skills employers are looking for in recent college grads. So all of the things that you are teaching your student leaders and that you are able to demonstrate for them that they are learning are all things that employers are looking for. So verbal, nonverbal and written communication, agility, time management, stress management, conflict resolution, leadership, accountability, initiative. Again, all of these things that you are doing within your student leadership programs and that you are educating your student leaders on, these are all of the skills that employers are looking for. I go out into the employer work world at least once a month on travel and talk with employers about what they're looking for, what advice they have to offer students. And the majority of employers are saying we can teach them the technical skills. They have to come in having the soft skills. So it is really important. I know we used to 5 years ago, probably about, we used to say soft skills weren't as important. The technical skills were. And now it is much more likely that an employer, as long as the student is able to demonstrate their soft skills, that an employer will be willing to invest in them to teach them the technical skills. This next slide shows, this is again from NACE, and this was actually just published about a week ago. But these are the attributes employers are seeking on a candidate's resume. So when an employer is looking at a candidate's resume, this is what they're looking for in terms of what the candidate has to offer. And so these are the skills that you can be focusing on with your student leaders in their student leadership opportunities. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment before I move on to my strategies and see if there are any questions that I can answer.
And
Okay, and
please
now
feel
I
free.
can, yep,
I was just
sorry.
saying,
And now I just
no,
noticed that everyone can see. Yep, let's do that.
no
There we go.
worries.
Is that better?
Oh, now
Nope.
we can't. Nope.
We
um,
did practice this.
we did. Friends, as you have questions, if you want to share them in the chat, if you want to private message them to either Lauren or to me, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, that's perfectly fine. Whatever you're most comfortable with is fine. But Lauren, you've done such a wonderful job of talking through these already. This is really helpful. There we go.
Okay, now can you see my notes or no?
Nope, can't see the notes.
Okay, all right, there we go.
Perfect.
Well, y'all know I was prepared because I took lots of notes. Okay, so all right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the strategies. So the first strategy that I think that is really important whenever you're working with student leaders is to support reflection and critical thinking, so that they are able to draw conclusions from evidence and propose solutions. So some of the ways that I think that you all can do this as leadership educators, and some ways that I've done this in the past that has been really fruitful, has been to make time for reflection with student leaders, allow them to propose solutions to issues that they're facing and share the rationale as to why or why not their proposal was accepted, making sure that you're giving them feedback along the way. And then my other tip is to provide opportunities for student leaders to be on the other side of the interview. And I'm going to go through each one of these tips and talk a little bit more about what I mean about that. But this piece, I think, is the foundational piece to um, students learning some skills that they can then exhibit on their resume and in an interview, so that they are showing that they are career ready. So one of the first things that I used to do with my students is at the end of every semester, when I would have a meeting with them, I would give them basically like a ticket out of class, I'm calling it, but a ticket out of a meeting, where I would give them 10 minutes to reflect on their experience as a student leader. And I would have them answer these questions. What are some of the most rewarding aspects? What are some of the most challenging aspects? What would you want to tell someone about your experience? What have you learned about yourself and others through this position? And how would you describe your responsibilities? And all they are doing is bulleting some things out that they are able to then discuss and talk about um, in an interview, on their resume, on LinkedIn. So these are all questions and all things that you can help them make meaning of their experience as a student leader through a brief reflection exercise. The next part of this strategy is being on the other side of the interview. And this is, again, something that I incorporated into my work with student leaders that I actually still am in contact with many of them. And they come back to me and they say, this was one of the most valuable pieces that I learned whenever I was a student leader with you. Um, you can get them involved in the interview process of hiring people that are going to replace them. Anytime there's a GA or a fellow or a scholar interview on campus, if they need a student representative, you've got the students that you can recommend for that. And then any professional staff interviews. I always had my students, my student leaders come in for professional staff interviews so that they could learn what it was like to be the interviewer, and they weren't always the one being interviewed. So they get accustomed to reviewing materials, reviewing resumes, looking at materials beforehand, understanding how to begin an interview, shaking hands, having the small talk, um, prepping them on their leadership role. What's their pitch? What are they going to say about their leadership role to a candidate, to someone that might be replacing them? It helps them get accustomed with what interview questions look like, and training them what illegal questions look like too. Ending the interview, shaking hands again, asking if they have any questions, being able to answer questions from the student leader side. And then after the interview, completing a rubric, being a part of hiring conversations, letting them know that their voice matters and that they're important to the hiring decision. And just at the bottom here, I said, like, role play, role play, role play, because I think even if you aren't able to do this in real time with them, there is still the opportunity in a professional development series for student leaders to role play these situations and give them the opportunity to be on the other side of the interview. All right, I'm going to pause there for some questions or comments about this strategy. Okay, I'm going to move on. Second strategy is, within their leadership role, focus on transferable skills and assist them with adding that leadership experience to their resume and LinkedIn. So you know best, either as their advisor or supervisor or mentor, what experience they're having within the role. And sometimes students need help expressing that. So on the career side, we'll say to students, okay, well, what did you do in that role? And they'll sit there with a blank stare and they're like, I don't really know how to describe what I do, or I'm having a hard time putting it into words. You as their person in that educator in that role can help them put words to what they do and help them identify these transferable skills. You can also help them whenever you're looking at their material. If you're going to look at resumes, if you're going to look at their LinkedIn, if you're going to sit down with them and do some of this, to avoid lingo. We use a lot of lingo in higher ed, and most students are not going into higher ed. And so, really training them and teaching them about avoiding lingo on their resume and in other places like LinkedIn, cover letter, things like that. And then again, you can solicit and offer examples that they just will not be able to think about because you're on the outside of the experience and they're on the inside of the experience. So as far as transferable skills, there are so many transferable skills that students are learning in their leadership roles. Things like critical thinking, written and verbal communication, conflict resolution, collaboration, problem solving. All of the things that I went over about top skills that employers are looking for, those are the transferable skills that student leaders are bringing into an internship or into the workplace. So you're able to share that with them. And then the other thing you're able to do is you're able to help them dig a little bit deeper. So on this slide, I have like a student might say, well, I mentor peer leaders or I mentor peers. Okay, dig deeper. What is it that you do? And so I would tell students, as much as you can quantify experiences, you need to be quantifying experiences. So provide leadership, mentoring, and academic coaching to 20 first-year students. As a bullet point on a resume, that's going to stand out a lot more than mentor peer leaders. But again, from the career side, we might not be able to tell them, this is actually what you do, but you will be able to share that with them and tell them that. Students will come and they're like, I facilitate meetings in my student leader position. Okay, that's great. What does that actually mean? So this is design and facilitate group sessions twice per week to promote student development, success, and engagement. Whatever that looks like, just being much more example focused, quantitative focused, and just more descriptive. Collaborate with faculty advisors and campus services. You can list what those are. You can list how many. You can list events that you've planned in this student leadership role. And then another example, engaged in 50 plus hours of initial and ongoing leadership development training. So as a student leader, they go through so much training and they are so well equipped in those sessions. They need to talk about that in their resume or in their LinkedIn or in their elevator pitch. Okay, I'm going to pause on strategy number 2. And if anybody has any questions about those.
Lauren, if you can see, we've got a couple of people, myself included, just sharing in the chat, like, yes, thank you for doing this, because I think being able to put into words, like Juana's talking about a football player student who said they didn't have any examples of working in groups. Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You are on a football team. You were communicating with all those players. That's what that means to provide examples of working with groups and working well and effectively in a group. But I think probably when you see yourself as a football player, for the student in particular, they weren't translating that into, and that means that I can work well in a group, right? So being
Exactly.
able to kind of talk this
Yes.
through, I think seems really helpful. And then Emily, I'm sorry, I haven't read your comment yet, but Lauren, just acknowledging Emily's comment
Yes.
here too.
Yeah.
Oh, aren't listing their leadership experiences because it's not a job.
The job.
There's not a title with
Yes.
it. I think that
Yes.
that's a really great point.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, because you are seeing them in this leadership role, you're able to tell them, like, yes, you led a group, or yes, you contributed to a team. Here's
Mm-hmm.
how you did that. You're able to have those conversations with them. So on the career side, when we're like, you need to be more descriptive here, and the student just stares at us, the next thing we often say is go talk to your boss, go talk to your mentor, go talk to your advisor, go have this conversation, because they'll be
Mhm.
able to point out instances where you've done that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love that.
And I'm just imagining it as the one in the interview with that student being able to, like, being able to talk with an interesting person in the interview and just saying, "I facilitate meetings."
Yes.
Don't make me draw that out of you. What do you do in those meetings? What
Yes.
is your involvement in meetings? They're now prepared to talk about their involvement in that meeting and what they do to help to lead something in that meeting, I think is really helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, okay, I'm going to move on to strategy 3. So I think this piece is also really important. Practicing storytelling using the STAR method. So the STAR method is used for behavioral interviewing when students are asked, tell me about a time when. So S stands for situation, T stands for task, A stands for action, and R stands for result. So explain the situation so the interviewer understands the context, but they don't need to know every detail. You need to spend about 20% of your time responding to a question using explaining the situation and the context. The task, talk about the task, the problem, the challenge you took responsibility for completing, and the goal of your efforts. That's like 10% of your time in answering that question. What did you have to achieve? Then action. This is going to take up the bulk of their time whenever they're discussing this. This describes the actions that they personally took to complete the task and to reach the end goal. This is really important that they have some examples here about when they personally did something, because a lot of times students can talk about the we, which is great, but they need to be able to say, I did. This is how I handled that. That piece is really important. And then the result. So explain the positive outcomes in the results. And here it's really important that they identify quantifiable results. And it's like, what did you learn from this experience? What um what have you used this information learned for in the future? Like how have you used this since? Is some of the information that you want to go over whenever you're talking about the result. And I think student leaders can find this piece really hard, but when they're going through something and you are advising them, that's where you can step back and say, okay, if you were asked about a challenging situation that you had to overcome in a group, this story is the story that you want to use. So this is what you want to do. So I've given you example on this next slide of like outlining what this looks like. So when I was a junior in high school, there were several students in my math class who were struggling with some of the more difficult and complex concepts. With an upcoming national exam, I was asked by my math teacher to start an after school session to assist the other students. And then the action is what I did. I stayed after school twice a week to review class materials and homework. I created a comprehensive study guide. I demonstrated the best methods. All of that is the action that was taken in order to solve the problem or the task that you were given. And then the result. Our class average for the national exam was the highest it had been in over 10 years. And overall, the students I help with were able to develop a better understanding and appreciation for math. So again, as a student is going through something, when I was working at the University of Cincinnati, I had a student leader that had like a treasurer who had found money missing. And once we got through the whole situation of the money was missing, now we got to figure out why the money went missing. Come to find out another student had used the money. Like it was a whole thing, right? And it was an ethical dilemma. But after it was resolved, I sat down with that student and was able to say, this example in an interview is going to be phenomenal. So let's talk through how you would answer about a challenging or an ethical situation that you have been up against as a student. let's talk about how you would respond to that and the response that you would get. And again, you know that very personally because you went through it with a student. So you can talk about that with the student. So I think this is a really good way to help students practice this skill is being able to talk with them about a situation that they've been through or something that they've done. I'm going
Lauren,
to
thank you.
pause.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say thank you for that example too. That processing of that incident is really critical. That's really
Yep.
helpful for that student. I see John's question in the chat that John, I don't know if this is intended as rhetorical or not, but I wonder, Lauren, if you can provide some context around like if NACE competencies are what hiring managers perhaps are looking for, then why aren't we as leadership educators using the same language around that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it depends on what campus you're on,
Mhm.
to be very transparent. Like there have been campuses that I've been on where like the University of Cincinnati and the student leaders that I supervised and advised, we were using this language with them. And through a professional, so we had monthly professional development um meetings with our student leaders where every month we chose a different topic, but all of them came back to the NACE competencies.
Mm.
So we had a meeting about transferring their leadership skills to their resume. And that was like one of our professional development series. We did the other side of the interview and doing some role playing in one of our professional development series. We did creating an online presence in the professional development series. So all of those series, those meetings once a month, were lending themselves back to the NACE competencies. Um, and when I got to Elon, I'll be honest, Elon was not really heavily using the NACE competencies. Even in our career center, we weren't really talking about them. But
Mhm.
as the internship director, every assignment that I gave students in my class, I told them which NACE competency it was bringing them back to and what they should be demonstrating. And so I think if you're being intentional about saying this is something that I want to give back to students and that I find value in, and you start using the language, it could probably catch on at your campus. But I do think it depends on what campus you're on and what unit you're on and in. And I hope that's helpful a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna go to strategy 4. Maybe, there we go. And this is integrating assessments into your work with student leaders. So here I'm talking about various assessments that can be utilized with student leaders. Personality assessments, interest inventories, values assessments, strengths assessments, preference assessments. These are all examples of assessments that can be used. And this is the point where I would say partner with your career center because usually career centers have access to these types of assessments through their work. So this is a place where I would say, yep, find a way to integrate this into your work. So in my work at the University of Cincinnati with student leaders are student leaders that were kind of elevated roles were given access to Clifton Strengths. And then our students that were just like our entry level positions, like leadership positions, were given access to the VIA, which is a values assessment. So they were able to take that as well. But this is definitely a place where I would say partner with your career center. All of this, I would say partner with your career center in some way. But this one's especially important because some of these assessments are pricey. They can cost a lot. And so sometimes career centers have access to these for a like wholesale price. But this is a way that you can integrate your work with student leaders and help them make meaning of their work that they're doing, how they're utilizing their strengths, maybe in the student leadership position. If you have like e-boards, maybe you do some executive boards that you have take some of these assessments so that they understand how to work better together or how to manage themselves in teams better. So some of that is what I would say about these types of assessments. Questions about that? Oh, yeah, Cloverleaf. John, I used Cloverleaf when I was at the University of Cincinnati. So we also used Cloverleaf and it was great. I loved it. It's a wonderful online resource for several of these assessments. Yes. Okay, so then my fifth strategy that I'll discuss is how you can engage in performance management systems with student leaders to highlight areas of growth, highlight strengths and opportunities for growth. And then I would say take it a step further if you can, have their peers evaluate their performance. And I think this is important for many, many, many reasons. So some of the ways that I would go at this from a performance management system is to create 3 to 5 categories. This does not have to be like our performance evaluations in higher ed that are 12 categories long. This can be 3 to 5 categories that you can evaluate all of your student leaders on. Dedication, timeliness, communication. I mean, all of the things that you can think of that you can evaluate all of your student leaders on. So again, selecting 3 to 5 categories that you can evaluate them on, creating a rubric and sharing it with them from the outset of their experience. And this can be done electronically, like if you use SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or a Google form. And you can definitely think through like the easiest way. And I've done all of the above. And every year I was at the University of Cincinnati, I changed up the way that I did my evaluations of my student leaders because there were so many of them. Um, and then and then for me, some of the most important pieces are under this effective feedback is targeted, communicates progress, timely, and gives students the opportunity to practice and implement the feedback received. So I used to, at the end of every semester, evaluate my student leaders and give them an opportunity then midway through the next semester, we would kind of revisit what it was that they were working on and what were some areas of growth. And I would point out areas like one of the things that I told you you needed to improve on was getting minutes out more quickly after a meeting. I've noticed in the last 2 months, you've been doing that really well. So I think some of this is really important. And then it gives them the ability to talk about this in an interview. They're then able to talk about the way that they've been evaluated in the past. They're able to talk about how they've been receptive to feedback. That's something all employers want to know. They want to know if an employee has been given feedback, what they've done with that feedback and what that has looked like. So I think that piece is important as well. And then this is my step further. I think it's really important to allow students to do peer-to-peer evaluations. It not only gives them the opportunity to receive feedback from their peers, but it starts educating them on performance management criteria. And this is another piece where they can talk about this in an interview. They can talk about the way that they have been able to give feedback, because a lot of students, I think, tend to want to give feedback maybe on personality or things that are not directly performance or job related. And this allows them the opportunity to start to get practice with that. So I said here, a simple way that you can gather feedback is strengths and opportunities. You can leave it open-ended. You can tell students like, give us, 1 or 2 strengths and opportunities for your e-board or your leaders that are part of whatever organization. And then a more complex way to do this is the same criteria that you evaluated them on, that 3 to 5 pieces of information, and then give them the opportunity to give some open-ended feedback so that you're able to then look at that and help students think through that. And it can all be anonymous. It doesn't have to have names attached. It can have names attached. And then I used to sit down, I had at the entry level kind of student leader role, that's where I had about, in my direct purview, were about 230 of those students. But then I had that elevated role of 8 mentors, and I would give the feedback to those 8 mentors for the peer leaders, and then the mentors were able to give the feedback to the peer leaders. So that piece was also, I think, really important and allowed students to have the opportunity to give one another feedback that, again, they can use in the interview, on their resume. They can talk about in all kinds of ways as far as performance management. Now I'm going to pause again and ask if there are any questions or any thoughts or anything that would be helpful.
I love this encouragement to provide peer-to-peer evaluations and in lots of different formats. It sounds like I appreciate that. Sometimes it is overwhelming or
Yes.
intimidating to provide face-to-face. And so knowing that you can encourage that anonymous feedback, but I think it's the giving and the receiving
Yep.
feedback that's really important for students too. So I appreciate that practice.
Okay, I'm going to put my contact information up here on the last slide. Again, Lauren Bosselait is my first and last name. And so this is my email address, lbosselait@elon.edu. You can feel free, if you want to chat about this further, if you have questions that you want to ask. I am always happy to talk about the career readiness competencies, employability, skill development, student leaders, all of the above. So I'm happy to have that conversation offline if anyone wants to connect with me and contact me. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and then Abby, I know you had a
Awesome.
few wrap-up items.
Yeah, and thank you so much for this, Lauren. I think this is so helpful in thinking about, and I see lots of folks are clapping and their reactions too, and I am doing that as well because I think so many of us, whether we are working with students that are getting ready for the workforce, or we have interns, or we're managing these student programs, or they're students in our personal lives, and we're thinking about like, "Ooh, you gotta get that resume pulled together, friend, because I'm not doing it for you." I think those conversations are so helpful and kind of figuring out like, what is this great big thing that I need to start preparing for, and where do I start? And I think you've given us some great ways to start those conversations and to provide some guidance to those big or small groups of students to start preparing and thinking about what that looks like for them, as you provide the guidance and not doing the work for them as well. So I appreciate this guidance here that you've offered us, Lauren. That's really helpful. Friends, does anyone have any questions, any asides or comments or feedback? Because we've invited feedback to the chat. Anyone have thoughts around how this has worked well, or ways that you've seen the NACE competencies and student programs that you're working with now? If anyone has anything to share there. And as always, you're welcome to come off mute or turn your camera on. And John, I see that you've done that. Did you have a question you wanted to pass along with us?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on the comment that I made about that if we're teaching the NACE competencies. So we use the NACE competencies in our leadership program and have based a lot of what we do, but our career and professional development department looks to us for only that leadership titled area, which now our institution's QEP, so how we're going to be accredited is going to be career readiness. So we're having those conversations with all the colleges across the university, and they're also having the same conversations, but they're talking about the same things we're talking about. So it's like, I don't want to step on their toes, but we are talking about the same things, just sometimes we use different language when we're talking about it. So I throw that out there collectively. If anybody has any great wisdom, that would be great.
Well, and I think that's interesting. And I would definitely say, as a student leader and as an educator, you are doing way more than just the leadership competency. And so it's really finding the language about the ways in which you are exposing students to the other competencies and how you are, I'm going to use the word training them to be career ready, like what those things are that you are doing that are getting your students to the point where they're going to be employable. I mean, everyone has a role to play at an institution, so I'm not negating anything that anyone else is doing, but as a student leader, they are exposed to all of these competencies. And so really thinking through how to articulate that to the masses.
Thank you for that. I at Leadership, we're delving into a practice of mapping learning objectives for our curriculum to the NACE competencies as well, for the same reason, I think, because it's a conversation that is more and more happening on college campuses. It's a helpful tool to be able to talk about the career readiness of students as they're preparing for attending a leadership program, and for campus administrators to figure out why would they send students to a session. So seeing what those mappings look like, I think, are helpful as well. I hope so. It sounds like it will be. Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and share my screen. And as I do that, just as a reminder, we will have we'll share the recordings of this session as well as the rest of the sessions for this week with everyone who registered for this week's session. So whether or not you only register for this one, you'll see the recordings for all of this week's sessions, and we'll share a link to register for the other sessions as well. Before I start talking, Lauren, I see this one last comment from Mike here about advocating for all NACE competencies. Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I 100% agree with this, Mike. And yeah, this is exactly what I was saying. In a leadership role, students are having to use all of the career readiness competencies. There are skills that they are developing as a student leader that hit every single one of those roles. I mean, every single one of those competencies. And so it is being able to advocate for that and to be able to demonstrate that through your work. So yes, I totally agree with that.
Yes, lots of language, lots of structure around different tools and methods, I guess, for that today. That's what Mike is getting across with us. I appreciate that. Thank you, Lauren. Very good. Well, thank you all again for joining us for our the first virtual conversation of the year. Thank you, Lauren, for guiding us through that conversation. I think you've given us all a lot to think about and to talk about with our students and with other folks in our office who are having these same kinds of conversations. In the meantime, if you don't have enough leadership swag in your life and you would like a whole lot more, we have a merch site. You might not know this. So here's a QR code and then the link to our merch site if you're interested in some hoodies and beanies and t-shirts, and we're adding a couple new products here pretty soon. So kind of an exciting time on our merch site if you're interested. We also have a couple of national sessions of the Leadership Institute coming up this summer, one in May in Boston and one at the end of July leading into August in Chicago. And we have cluster facilitator applications open for those sessions. There's the QR code for that application if you'd like to apply for that. If you know someone who might be interested in applying for that, please send that their way. And then, as promised, we have more sessions coming up for the rest of this week. And I'll share the link here in the chat with you all. If you'd like to register for more sessions for our virtual conversation series, we'll host them still Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week. Everyone's taking Friday off for the virtual conversation series, but there's a link to register for the other sessions. And thank you all so much for joining us. As I'm looking at my time here today, it looks like maybe you get 5 minutes back in your schedule where no one knows you're not in a meeting. So what a gift to you. I hope you use those last 5 minutes to, I don't know, maybe eat lunch or maybe dance it out to your favorite song or take a stroll or consider the NACE competencies. But thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.